There was a story last week, and I wanted to follow up because for people out there who have kids, pretty important to know. So it turns out Montreal Public Health discovered a case of the measles in Montreal, and now, or at least this was the case last week, don't know that there's an update, trying to trace back to see who the infected person may have come into, because obviously, as I mentioned before, measles is highly transmissible, and for little people, for kids, it can actually, in some cases, be fatal. So we wanted to get you caught up on this story. Dr. Chris Labos is on the line. He's a cardiologist with a degree in epidemiology, and he also appears regularly here on CJAD on Weekends with Ken. Dr. Labos is on the line. So let's start, Chris, if we could, with just how serious this is. And I know the appeal was put out last week. Has anything come of that?
I haven't heard anything new, so it doesn't seem as if they've diagnosed any new cases, at least as far as I'm aware, or if they have, they haven't made those cases public yet. But this is serious because, you know, a measles outbreak, if it does happen, is going to make a lot of kids sick and going to put even more strain on a healthcare system that can, you know, barely tolerate it at the best of times. So, I mean, we've eliminated measles from Canada, and I think we officially eliminated measles back in the 2000s or so. When you do see cases like this, it's because somebody, you know, has traveled and imported it from overseas. And normally that wouldn't be an issue, except that if vaccination rates start to slip and there's enough susceptible individuals out there, that's when you start getting outbreaks and little clusters of cases.
So what do people need to know here who have children, who hear this story? And again, we're trying to find out where contact was, who it had been made with. So what should you be looking for?
Well, the most important thing for you and for your kids is, have your kids gotten the measles vaccine or not? And really, that's the one thing that you really have under your control, because, you know, otherwise you don't really know who you're coming into contact with. You don't know who they've come into contact with. And again, as long as everyone is vaccinated, the likelihood of an outbreak is actually very, very small. You know, people used to talk a lot about herd immunity during COVID, and people, I think, kind of misunderstood what that term meant. What herd immunity actually means is that if you have enough vaccinated people in a population, even if you have a small number of unvaccinated people, they don't tend to get sick and you don't have outbreaks because there isn't enough vulnerable people for the virus to gain a purchase and start having community spread. The problem with measles is that it's so infectious, you need to have a vaccination rate, you know, above 95%. And while we're still not bad in this province, we're sort of in the, like, I think, high 80s, that's still low enough that if the right, you know, circumstances come together, an outbreak could happen. So for you, if you're a parent of a young child, it's really make sure that your child was vaccinated and that they got the full complement of vaccinations, which is the 2-dose sequence.
So can I ask, I know there are figures to show this or not, but the idea, of course, post-COVID people and vaccines, and, you know, we knew the skepticism attached to it. Are you starting, or have we started to see that with parents and kids, even for something like measles?
I think we have, and I think when you look globally at both Canada and the U.S., you've seen sort of a slow slide of you know, problems with vaccination. There's sort of two sort of issues, and one of it was the logistics, when it was hard to get an appointment, when a lot of stuff was shut down. You know, a lot of people just couldn't get their vaccinations, and this was a big deal with the global vaccine effort in terms of, you know, shipping vaccine doses to all the countries of the world. But post that, there is a little bit of this vaccine skepticism still out there. And, you know, there are people who, whereas normally they might have done it because of everything that's been swirling around COVID, there's a lot of people who are sort of hesitant now. And I think this is the real worry, is that this anti-vaccine rhetoric might actually get people to stop doing other vaccines, which would just, you know, potentially see the resurgence of diseases that we haven't seen in frankly, decades.
So that being the case, if we're going to focus on measles here, you have a child perhaps who hasn't gotten the measles shot for whatever your reason happens to be. What are you looking for symptom-wise, if that's in fact going to be an issue? Is it spots? What are we looking for?
Yeah, it's the typical measles rash. And I mean, there was a time when you said that to people, they knew exactly what you mean. But now I would wager most parents have no idea what a measles rash looks like because they've never seen a case, because they probably didn't have it. None of their friends have had it, and their kids have never had it. So, I mean, you can Google these images. It's going to be very hard for me to explain this on the radio. But if you see a typical measles rash, it's probably measles. And especially if you're unvaccinated, that's, you know, a pretty clear and easy diagnosis to make.
Okay. And if you do spot that, and as I said, I saw the picture, it's pretty obvious what it is when you look at the picture. let's say that does begin to happen, your first move should then be what? Take your child to a hospital? What should it be?
It really depends how sick they are. If you have a mild case, and many cases of measles will be mild, then you can probably write it out at home. The most important thing is, isolation so you don't go and infect others.
Right.
If there are severe cases, then yeah, it really is hospital. And there are severe cases of measles. I mean, part of the rhetoric that you sometimes hear people saying, oh, this is a mild disease. Why are we bothering vaccinating people against it? Well, I mean, yes, most cases are mild, as with all diseases, but there's a substantial minority of very, very severe cases that can make people very sick and die. People, do die of measles. We haven't seen that in decades because we have a vaccine against it.
And when you say people, I'm talking specifically about kids here. When I was a child in this particular case that came into contact with someone, is this again something that affects younger children more than it does older children or even adults?
It really depends. I mean, when you start to see the severe complications, you tend to see them at both spectrums of age. So very, very young and very, very old, They tend to be the worst off. Certainly the very young children, like under a year of age that haven't been vaccinated, they are going to have the most severe cases because they have no immunity against it because they haven't been vaccinated. Mm-hmm. So they're the ones that tend to be worse off. And of course, if you have pre-existing medical problems, that always makes things worse because if you're healthy, you might be able to ride out an infection, but if you have underlying medical problems, then you're more likely to suffer consequences as a result.
So let me move on to that while we still have a minute and talk about the other story that's in the news. Again, this is probably not one anyone saw coming. Report that the HIV epidemic is on the rise again within Quebec. Actually, more cases here than the national average. What do we attribute this to?
So there's probably two factors here. One of it, because these are the 2022 numbers, and people might be saying, wait a minute, why are we talking about the 2022 numbers? It's because it takes a while for these statistics to be compiled, and 2023 just ended, so we don't have those numbers compiled yet. So last year's numbers, when you look at them, are in fact higher. At least some of that might be a bit of a catch-up in testing that happened after COVID, because, again, during the worst of the pandemic, a lot of people were not going for sort of basic blood tests and sort of basic screening. So a lot of cases that might have been diagnosed in 2020, 2021 were probably only diagnosed in 2022. So some of that is a result of the backlog of cases. But the other sort of more chronic long-term issue with this is that, again, you have a generation of people who were not around in the 1980s who think that HIV is a virus like any other, and you don't have to worry about it. And if you weren't around in the 1980s to have experienced the horror that was the AIDS epidemic, you don't have firsthand knowledge of how catastrophic a disease this can be. And a lot of young people probably think like, oh, this will be fine. There's a treatment for it. And of course there is. And there are great treatments. And we've done great things in terms of treating HIV, but it's always better not to have it in the first case.
Again, so you find out perhaps there's something going on here. First thing you should do is obviously pay attention and not ignore this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if there's any doubt in your mind, get tested, because the earlier you start treatment, the better off you're going to be. And again, not to be too negative, we have fantastic treatments with HIV. You can actually get people's viral load down to like an undetectable amount. And that's not a cure, but it's probably the next best thing. But it is a lifelong medical therapy that you can actually never really stop. All
right. I want to mention, thank you again, and mention that for those of you probably heard Dr. Labos is the author of a new book, which is called
Does Coffee Cause Cancer?
And you're going to be doing a signing for this book this weekend, right? Are you at Fairview, at the Indigo store in Fairview?
Exactly right. Right. So the Indigo store in Point Claire, the one across from Fairview, and starting at 1 o'clock. And Ken Connors is going to be swinging by to help me do a Q&A and talk about the book.
Excellent. So you can get there, pick a copy of the book up, and get to ask Dr. Labos a question firsthand. So that's Saturday at the Indigo store, not in Fairview, across from Fairview, on the other side of St. John, Saturday at 1 o'clock. Dr. Labos, thanks so much.
Thank you.